On that frigid Manhattan morning, the air seemed to carry a strange kind of coincidence. The traffic, the honking horns, and the steam rising from the iron covers on the sidewalk formed the perfect backdrop for the improbable. Ethan Wallace, a millionaire known for turning risks into fortunes, gazed absently out the window of his luxury car. He was returning from a meeting when fate decided to play a trick on him. There, on the corner of an ordinary street, he saw something that froze his world. A woman, in a simple coat and with a steady gaze, was waiting for an Uber. Beside her, 3 small boys played, laughing loudly. And what made Ethan's heart stop wasn't the sound of their laughter, but the reflection he saw in the car window. The boys looked exactly like him. For an instant, time stood still. The past he had buried years ago was resurfacing in flesh, blood, and innocence. And before the driver could ask if everything was okay, Ethan could only mumble, "This can't be." But it was. And what he would discover next would change everything he believed about love, destiny, and forgiveness. If you think fate has curious ways of making us face what we run away from, leave a like now and subscribe, because what happened after this scene will leave you speechless. Ethan Wallace was always a man who believed that success could heal any pain. When he left the small apartment he lived in with Claire, his fiancée at the time, he swore to himself that he would never again feel the bitter taste of loss. And he kept that promise. At least when it came to money, that he built empires, bought bankrupt companies, and turned ideas into millions. People called him the man who touched failures and turned them into gold. But what no one saw was that behind the expensive watches and dinners and illuminated penthouses, there was a void that not even the sound of applause could fill. Claire had been his anchor. The woman who believed in him when he was still working in insurance and dreaming too big. But success comes at a price, and Ethan's was rush. Rush to prove himself, rush to rise, rush to succeed. Even if it meant leaving those he loved behind, he remembered the last time he saw her. It was autumn, and the Boston wind carried with it the scent of goodbye. Claire held a letter he never wanted to read and said in a trembling voice, "Money will buy you the world, Ethan, but it won't buy you peace." He laughed, as if hearing a superstition. Today, that phrase came back like an uncomfortable echo, repeating itself in his mind as he stared at the reflection of the 3 boys who looked just like him. With each memory, a doubt grew. Had she moved on? Or did that quick glance he saw around the corner hide something deeper? The truth is, fate has a cruel sense of humor. It waits for the moment when you think you've got it all under control, only to show you how much you've never controlled anything. Ethan spent the rest of that day restless. He canceled appointments, turned off his phone, and lost himself in his thoughts. For the first time in years, he felt fear, not of failure, but of something money couldn't solve. The past, yes, the New York sky darkened. One question kept running through his mind. What if those boys really were mine? If you've ever had the feeling that the past can knock on your door when you least expect it, leave a like and comment. Would you face what you left behind, or would you continue pretending it never existed? The next day seemed all too ordinary for a man who held the world in his hands. New York woke, as usual, cold, hurried, and indifferent. People bumped into each other on the sidewalks without apology. The cafes were crowded, and the distant sound of sirens mingled with the pounding of footsteps. Ethan walked the streets in a dark suit, trying to look his usual self. But something inside him had changed. He couldn't concentrate in meetings, nor could he feign interest in the numbers that once fascinated him. The faces of those boys, the 3 small smiles identical to his own, remained in his mind. He sat in a downtown coffee shop, the same kind of place where he used to dream about the future, and now he wondered if he had left the future behind. The barista recognized him, asked if he wanted his usual, and Ethan just nodded, distracted. Outside, Life was moving along at a fast pace, but he seemed stuck in slow motion. He opened the newspaper, pretending to read. But in the reflection of the window, he saw a father walking with his son. Small gestures, the way he adjusted the child's coat, the touch on the head, the knowing smile, hit him like a punch. That it was simple. It was real. And he realized how much he had forgotten to feel. He stirred his now cold coffee. He remembered the corner where he'd seen her, and the way Claire held her phone, hailing an Uber with that look of haste and resignation mixed with it. He hadn't seen her in years, and yet it took only a second for him to recognize her. Maybe I should have gotten out of the car at that moment, he thought, but fear paralyzed him. Fear of facing what had been and what could have been. The clock struck 12:45 when he made a silent decision. He needed to see her again. Not out of curiosity, but because something inside him called for it. That if you believe that destiny doesn't cross paths by chance, leave your like and subscribe, because what Ethan was about to do next would completely change the course of this story. Ethan returned to that corner the next day at exactly the same time. His heart pounded as if he were a teenager about to relive an old dream. The cold seemed sharper, time slower. He looked at every face he passed until he saw her, Claire. She was there, wearing gray coats and blue scarves, their hair tied up in a simple style that only heightened their presence. The boys played in the dirty snow that accumulated on the sidewalk. One kicked the ice, the other laughed, and the youngest watched the people curiously. Ethan stood still, watching from afar. He hadn't seen her in years, but something about her remained intact. That same air of lightness that seemed out of place in the rush of the world. Only now there was something new. Weariness in her eyes, strength in her smile. Her every gesture seemed to carry the weight of a story he didn't know. When she bent down to tie one of the boy's sneakers, he saw the kind of love money can't buy. A love lived in silence, with hands, with patience, with everyday life. The boys were undeniable. The same brown hair, the same way they frowned when they concentrated. The older one even bit his lower lip, just like Ethan did when he was nervous. That it was impossible to deny. But still, he tried. It must be a coincidence, he muttered, trying to convince himself. But when the youngest stumbled and she ran to hug him, calling him Eli, he felt the ground disappear. Eli was the name he and Claire had chosen many years before for the son they never had. That memory hit him hard, as if fate were teasing him. Do you remember now? For a moment, Ethan almost went to her, but he stopped. That I didn't know what to say. What do you say after so long? After so much silence, the Uber arrived. She helped the boys in, fastened their seat belts, and before closing the door, looked in his direction. That it was a brief but accurate look. She recognized him, and that second was enough to reopen all the wounds he pretended to have forgot. The car drove off, and Ethan stood there, motionless, his hands shaking and his heart pounding. He knew he could no longer ignore what he saw. That if you believe that certain people come back into our lives for a reason, comment below. Fate never makes mistakes. And leave a like, because what Claire was about to reveal would turn Ethan's world upside down. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boys' faces and Claire's gaze, as if time were punishing him for everything he'd left behind. He grabbed a bottle of wine, sat in front of the fireplace, and for the first time in years, let the silence speak. The memories came in waves. The small apartment in Boston, the laughter on the torn couch, the smell of burnt coffee on Sunday mornings. It all seemed so distant, and yet so alive it hurt. Claire was his partner, his confidant, the only person who reminded him of who he was before money. But success came too quickly, and with it, pride. That he began traveling, closing deals, sleeping in hotels that looked like museums, and little by little, she was left aside. First came the small arguments, the the schedule clashes, then the silence. And then one night, Claire just left. He left a letter on the table. Ethan never had the courage to read it. Now, looking at the flames, he wondered what would have happened if he had opened that envelope. Could it be that within him there was an explanation for everything? If he had read it, would those 3 boys not be in his life today, but by his side? Regret tastes bitter, and Ethan felt every drop that he thought about calling her. He searched online, but found nothing. It was as if Claire had disappeared off the map, and fate had saved her only for that unlikely reunion on the street. But something inside him insisted, this isn't over. And when the heart insists, not even pride can silence it. Deep down, he knew he needed to find her, understand, ask for forgiveness, or at least know the truth. Because sometimes love doesn't die. It just hides, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. And Ethan felt that moment had arrived. If you believe that the past never truly goes away, leave a like and subscribe. Because what he was about to discover would go far beyond what he imagined. 2 days passed. Ethan could no longer bear the weight of doubts. He asked for help from the driver who always accompanied him, a man named Martin, who had known him for over a decade. He showed him an old photo of Claire, kept at the bottom of his wallet. I need to find her, he said in a tone Martin had never heard before. It took a while, but fate, once again, cooperated. One of the driver's contacts recognized the woman. She lives in Brooklyn, near the public school, with 3 young boys. Ethan felt his heart race. The next day, at dusk, he parked his car on a simple street lined with leafless trees. The cold was biting, but he didn't even feel it. He walked to the blue door of house number 24. He took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened, and for a moment, the two just stared at each other. Claire said nothing. Neither does he. The silence between them seemed to carry all the years they had been apart. She broke the ice first. I thought you would never show up. Me too, he replied with a nervous half-smile. Time had been kind to her. The lines on her face were from stories, not weariness. And in her eyes, there was still that stubborn sparkle of someone who lives for love, even when the world seems against it. The boys ran to see who was at the door. And that's when what Ethan could never have expected happened. The older man looked at him for a second and smiled. "Mommy, he looks like me," he said, laughing out loud. Claire froze. Ethan gasped. Before anyone could say anything, the youngest ran and hugged him around the legs with the pure trust of a child. Good. The world stopped. The sound of the streets disappeared. Ethan looked at Claire, confused, stunned. What did he say? She looked away. They always asked about you. The phrase came as a sentence. The man who had everything discovered in that moment that had also lost everything. The courage, the chance, the time. Claire, what's going on? He asked, trying to contain his trembling voice. She sighed, held back her tears, and simply replied, I think it's time you knew the truth. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Ethan felt the weight of years pile up on his shoulders. They are my children, he asked, his voice almost a whisper. She didn't answer. He just looked down. And that was enough. Ethan sat on the steps of the house, dazed, trying to understand how fate had brought him here. 3 boys, 3 lives, 3 chances he didn't even know he had lost. If you were in his place, what would you do? Run away or stay? Comment below what your heart would say at that moment. Like and subscribe, because the revelation that comes next is even stronger and will completely change the course of this story. Claire finally found the courage to speak that he sat across from Ethan. The boys playing in the yard, distant but attentive. She took a deep breath and began, I tried to warn you, Ethan. I really did. But you disappeared. You changed your number, you moved cities, and I had no way to find you. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Each word she spoke was an invisible blade cutting through the pride he'd cultivated for years. I thought you were never coming back, he replied, almost whispering. I didn't even know if you'd come back. Claire said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She told everything, how she struggled to raise her 3 boys alone, facing sleepless nights, overdue bills, the loneliness of being a mother, and at the same time having to hide the truth about their father. Ethan listened to her silently, every detail sinking in like a knife. He compared that strength to everything he had achieved with money and realized that, despite having empires, he would never have experienced something so pure. The boys entered the room, bringing with them the innocence and certainty of childhood. The oldest held his hand, staring intently, as if he knew the man had lost more than he could imagine. "Dad," the younger man said, his voice sounding like it cut through time, distance, and the pride Ethan had carried for years. The tears came, silent but intense. He realized that what he had lost wasn't just Claire, not just the years, but the opportunity to be a father. And suddenly, what seemed impossible was there before him. 3 lives that were part of him, that carried his laughter, his gaze, and above all, his chance for redemption. She looked at him and said something that cut even deeper. "I never wanted your money, Ethan. I just wanted you to meet them." That sentence detonated the last shred of arrogance that remained in him. The rich man, accustomed to buying everything, realized that true value was never in money, but in human connections, in presence and love that he had never given. And as the boys ran around the room, Ethan made a silent promise. He would never let time slip away again. Not this time. That if this story touched you, like it now, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you would do if you discovered you had 3 children without knowing. Because the next chapter will reveal something that will change everything at once. The final proof Ethan needed to believe that life can still surprise. Ethan knew he could no longer live in doubt. That unexpected reunion, the looks, the identical smiles, everything pointed to a truth he needed to confirm. He took a deep breath and, in a firm voice, asked, "Claire, is there any way we can be sure?" She sighed, closed her eyes for a moment, and replied, "Yes, Ethan. A DNA test." The days that followed were endless. Each hour seemed to last an eternity. He avoided thinking about business, meetings, and achievements. The outside world disappeared, leaving only him, Claire, and the boys' anticipation. The silence of the house seemed to amplify every thought, every memory, every regret. Finally, the results arrived. Ethan held the envelope with trembling hands. Claire looked at him, trying to hide her nervousness, but failing. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. He nodded, took a deep breath, and opened the paper. The words jumped out at him. "Confirmed. All 3 boys are yours." Ethan's world came crashing down, and then rebuilt itself in seconds. Tears streamed down her face, mixed with laughter and sobs of disbelief. He knelt before the boys, hugging them as if he would never let them go. "I'm your father," he said, his voice breaking, trying to contain the emotion that threatened to explode. Claire watched, and her heart filled with relief and tenderness. She knew that this man, who seemed so distant, had finally understood something essential. That true love cannot be bought, nor won with titles, mansions, or expensive cars. It can be felt, protected, and cultivated. The eldest held his hand and said, "Are you going to stay with us?" Ethan looked at Claire, then at the 3 boys. "Yes," he replied, and that single word carried all the lost years, all the unsaid apologies, all the love that could still blossom. And there, in that moment, the millionaire finally understood what true wealth meant. That IT wasn't gold, it wasn't companies, it wasn't trophies. That IT was presence, it was love, it was a new beginning. That if you were moved by this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment. Would you believe that destiny can return what seemed lost forever? In the next chapter, we'll follow Ethan's transformation and how he decides to rebuild the life he lost, a story of redemption that will move you even more. After the DNA test, Ethan Wallace's life changed forever. It wasn't just the knowledge that he had 3 children. It was the realization that everything he had pursued until then, without realizing it, was just a shadow of what really mattered. The following days were a mix of laughter, tears, and learning. He helped Claire organize the boys' routines, prepare breakfast, and take them to school. Every moment, every simple gesture was a discovery. Ethan learned that true power was not in what he could buy, but in what he could give without expecting anything in return: attention, affection, presence. The boys quickly bonded with him. The oldest, Eli, took pride in helping the younger learn to tie his shoelaces. The middle one imitated his concentrated frown, and the youngest, innocent, simply called him Dad with a confidence that melted any heart. It was as if time could be recovered, but without rushing. Without rushing, just living each moment fully. Claire watched, overcome with emotion. She knew it wouldn't be easy to make up for years of absence, but she saw Ethan transform before her eyes. The man who once saw numbers, contracts, and profits now saw faces, hugs, and smiles. He began to appreciate the little things he had previously ignored. The smell of coffee, the spontaneous laughter of children, simple walks in the park. Ethan also learned to apologize, acknowledge mistakes, and open up about his feelings. His relationship with Claire began to rebuild, not as before, but deeper and more mature. They realized that love isn't about perfection, but about presence and commitment. The man who had everything finally realized that true wealth is not measured in dollars or mansions, but in shared moments and rebuilt bonds. Fate, ironically and generously, had given him back what he needed most: the chance to be a father, to love, and to be truly loved. If you believe that it's always possible to start over, even after years of separation, subscribe to the channel and comment. Could you rebuild your life with the one you love after so much time? Ethan Wallace learned, unexpectedly, that fate has curious ways of teaching us what really matters. The man who once measured his life in numbers and fortunes now understood that true wealth is shared love, daily presence, and sincere forgiveness. The 3 boys, every laugh, every gesture, reminded him that some opportunities are too precious to waste. Claire and Ethan weren't rewriting the past, but building a future together, step by step. Through mistakes and successes, hugs and tears, they rediscovered the value of what is simple and essential. If this story touched you, like it now, subscribe to the channel and comment. Do you believe that destiny always gives us a second chance? And remember, what is lost is not always definitive. Sometimes it is just an invitation to begin again in a truer, more intense, and more human way. Love, when it's real, always finds its way back.